Unfortunately, being so bewildered with many pressures on my brain, seeing all these people behave so treasonous, it was just too much for me to put together. But I now know what he was telling me, and it'll happen if the plane gets in the air, even. So my opinion is that we be kind to children and be kind to seniors and take the portion like they used to take in ancient Greece and step over quietly, because we are not committing suicide. It's a revolutionary act. We can't go back. They won't leave us alone. They're now going back to tell more lies, which means more congressmen, and there's no way we can survive.
As kids, we were taught to how you endure torture. And we were taught death from an early age when I joined in 13. So I never thought I'd see 21. And then as things got worse in Jonestown, Jim kept saying, the guy needs liberation. Now they're the enemy, and they'll be coming in with tanks and guns. And
he was a predator. Jim Jones was a predator. So he preyed specifically, as one of the participants said, he preyed on African Americans because of their faith.
Hi, this is Dr. Michelle, and I want to welcome everyone to another episode of Tabernacletalks. And today, we're just continuing our discussions about the Jonestown Massacre. And we've actually have someone in our studio audience today that's going to be asking us some pretty tough questions and joining in the discussion. I want to welcome Ann Logan, and I want to welcome our return guest, Dr. Wendy Edmonds. Hi, Dr. Edmonds.
Everyone.
Wonderful. Okay, we saw in segment one when we heard from Leslie Wagner about the challenges that she had in terms of escaping and the challenges that she met in this country upon returning. We then in the second segment heard from Dr. Edmonds about this whole notion of toxic followership. So I think before we kind of jump in and start having our discussion, Dr. Edmonds, can you give us a refresher on what toxic followership is?
Yes, I always want to make sure that everyone understands the context in which I'm speaking of toxic followership. And I define toxic followership as a trusted leader who manipulates the mindset of others to the extreme obedience, to the point that the followers begin to mimic the behavior of the toxic leader. They act like them, they make decisions like them, and they will even give their life for that individual, that toxic leader.
Now that's interesting you say that, because when I looked up the term, and we hear this a lot, that when people get into cults, there's an element of brainwashing. And when I looked up the term brainwashing, it said you have to obliterate the target's identity. So basically you deconstruct who they are,
Yeah.
and then you replace it with behaviors or attitudes or feelings that would probably never have been their own had you not just completely obliterated their sense of identity. So I guess I want to pick on Ann a little bit, because I know throughout time there have been toxic leaders, even in the Bible. We've been warned about false prophets. We've had prolific writings from people that talk about there will be these false people that will come into our lives and fool us. Why do you think it still continues to happen?
Because people, I think they have a need to want to be part of a bigger group. Here's an example. I have two individuals. One is family member. One is a friend's daughter. They have been in, I want to say, a fellowship of that sort. They were extremely brilliant women, college bound, in fact, college educated ladies, beautiful. One was a model. And in a period of, I would say 2 years, when I seen them both, they were both totally different. I don't mean, oh, leave me alone, I don't want to be bothered. Their conversations were extremely volatile.
Mm.
You might see the one person, she would not talk for a period of time. And then when she was visiting, and then all of a sudden she'd come out with this warfare, and they're trying to do things to us, and they're giving us medications, and she just rattle on with different conversations within a short period of time. You might hear 6 or 8 different conversations within 10 minutes. And I think, at least I know the one that was a family member was looking for something that she didn't have because she was away from home and she went out on the streets. And I think she got involved with one of those organizations. In fact, I know she did. And it became, this has been 10 years ago, and it's still not clear as to what's going on with her, either one of them.
Wow. Now, Dr. Edmonds, how did you come up with the term toxic followership?
Yes, I want to say that I'm absolutely sorry for your family member and the other person and all of those who are out there who have been who have become victims of someone, a leader with no, just morally bankrupt, right? Mm-hmm. And so how did I come up with toxic followership? When I interviewed the survivors of the Jonestown Massacre, there really wasn't any evidence of just following someone just because they believed in this person. There were different reasons why they followed Jim Jones. Some were children and had no choice. And then some of their parents followed Jim Jones for different reasons. So Jim Jones, remember, had these fake healing sessions, but no one knew they were fake except the colluders who helped to make this whole pretend healing service seem like a reality. And so who doesn't want to be healed from an illness? When you have a child who is wayward and this pastor has this special power to heal, why would you not think that this is the place when other people are saying that they have been healed? They have seen their examples of the manifestations of this healing service, even though those lies were just that and it wasn't the truth. It was enough to follow. So that was a total exploitation of the scriptures.
Well, and you're right, because in the scriptures, we know that people were healed.
Yes.
And so it's unfortunate that that level of manipulation occurs, that I'm going to stage healing so that people will think I have this kind of divine power. Help us understand, because these were African Americans. The majority of the followers were African Americans. And I don't believe us to be people that are not discerning, you know, right, and need more evidence to trust. What was happening, did you find, in that time in the 70s that just made them look for an out or an escape? Were they running from something or running to something?
So that's hard to say. Again, every situation was so different. What I will say is that when we collectively find a good thing, we share it with our families. Which is why when the massacre took place, that awful, dreadful day, November 18th, 1978, generations of family members perished. That was sisters, uncles, aunts, grandparents. You're talking about wiping out generations of people, of us, the same family. And so while I know from research that he did prey on the poor, and for his reasons, the main contact that he wanted was because of their belief in God. So I'm going to provide just what brings them together. And so we have to be mindful of what we believe God to be. So we have to look in ourselves and really think about what we are looking for when we go to church. And that's how things get missed, right? It's all about deception. So he was whatever someone wanted him to be. He was to them. He was the healer. He had them call him Father. He had that closeness. You're missing, I'm Dad. So he became what was missing in some people's lives. And then the radical movement of, yes, we are going to do something that nobody else has ever done. And when you are part of a movement, you become part of a movement. You believe in that movement. You will do anything to support that movement. And that's how a lot of them followed him as well. Remember, that was a time when we were just coming out of the 60s, the radical movements that it took to change laws and policies in this country.
I had the opportunity to meet another survivor, and she was actually able to leave the camp a year prior to the massacre. And she used the term, she was able to negotiate her release. And that was an interesting term because it was clear you didn't feel free to go. There were conditions placed on her leaving. Did any of that come out in your focus group at all?
None of that came out because those that participated in the focus group were never able to negotiate an out. So that's the difference. They were never able to. When we think about Leslie's story, her story is that we're going on a picnic. Right? That's not negotiations. That is telling this story to save your life and the life of your child and the life of those with you who are trying to get away.
We've all been in leadership positions, and I know I've been in leadership positions, and you've been in leadership positions, and we've all had toxic followers. So even when I think of from a leadership standpoint, when you've had that follower that maybe is so vocal and so negative, and they create a spirit of, and you think, where does that come from? But then I think this is different because in this case, intoxicated followers is the term that you used.
Yes. Intoxicating came from one of the participants who made a comment and said, being a part of Jonestown, being a part of People's Temple, that movement in itself was intoxicating. There were times when I felt absolutely invigorated, just excited to be a part. And then there were times where I was so intoxicated, my head was spinning when I began to see the things that I knew weren't right. When I saw the things that Jim Jones was doing, and I knew it was wrong. When I heard him say things across the pulpit had nothing to do with God, I knew it was wrong. So it was both sides of feeling intoxicated.
Wow.
And it was from one extreme to the other.
Well, Ann, you had an opportunity, you watched both segments. Was there anything new that you learned about the Jonestown Massacre that maybe you didn't know before you saw the segments?
Yes and no. I was, okay, at the time, I was, oh gosh, my son was only 4 years old. And I was focused on him and really not focused on Jonestown at the time. I knew it was a tragedy, but I didn't realize the majority of the congregation was African-American. I didn't realize that some of his top leaders were not African-American. They were government officials, according to what I listened to. I didn't realize that, again, cyanide and grape juice. I mean, we heard all kinds of different things, but we never heard the cyanide part. It was like, you know, they just went out and did this on their own. We didn't realize that, I myself didn't realize that they were in a situation such as the, what were the ones in Texas in that camp?
Branch Davidians, the Branch Davidians.
Absolutely. I didn't realize that it was that mind altering. I thought it was maybe like, okay, he paid all these people to go with him and, you know, they got to leave whenever they wanted to. And then sometime later, I didn't connect the senator that had gone there to investigate what was going on. And I didn't connect his death with the conspiracy, the guy that got on the plane and actually killed all of those people that were leaving or had left. You know, so it was a lot, it was very eye-opening for me. I had a question that I was gonna ask Ms. Wagner when I was hoping that she was gonna be on, because when she talked about going that 30 miles and how she, you know, crawled her way up that mountain, by the time she got finished, I was out of breath. You know, like, wow, she had me so intense into what she was saying that I thought, okay, now you're at the top and all of a sudden you hear this voice that says, it's gonna be all right. So what was God telling her? How was he telling her? What direction was he asking her to go in order to, you know, find her freedom, you know, find what she needed, you know, to move forward? Because God has to give that to you. You can't just get to a point in your life and say, if you hear the voice of God and say, he says, oh, it's going to be okay, it's going to be fine. But then he also has to move you in a direction to show you what way to go. You know, you just can't go willy-nilly and think you're going to make it, because there's so many different directions that you could go.
And you know, what's also interesting about that is that she heard that voice, that still quiet voice in the midst of all of this that's going on. And so I think about myself, where it'll be something very simple. You know, don't take the Beltway, take whatever this other route is. And you often think it's just you. So you just, okay, I'll go ahead and do it. And then you hear on the radio, there's a 2-hour backup on 495. And you're like, yes. But you know, sometimes right, with things around you happening, you can miss that voice, or it is so familiar that you think that's just me. Let me just go ahead and hop on the Beltway. So I think it's even more amazing to me that with the exhaustion from the physical activity of walking 37 miles, crawling with great fear across a bridge, your baby is strapped to your back, sleep deprived, nutrition deprived, and you hear the voice of God and you know it.
Sounds like here.
The sheep know the voice of the shepherd.
Right.
Real. That's what was real to me about that story.
Mhm.
And you bring up an interesting point, because when I first heard that story, I thought about Harriet Tubman, and I thought, here we are in 1978, and this sounds like people escaping from a plantation. And there were so many examples that she gave of similarities between their captivity, because they were captive as far as I was concerned, and their escape. And I thought this was 1978, and you would think that this could never, ever, ever happen again. And then a few years later it did.
Yeah, again. And remember that 1978, you think about the music at that time, it always takes me back because I was in high school. And everybody remembers high school, the song for your graduation, everything is going on, and you're just having fun as a child, as a teenager. Where's the next party? What's the next fashion? Is my daddy going to bring me home some material so I can make my clothes for the weekend? I made my own clothes. I mean, those were the kinds of things that was on my mind. And then when this happened, I turned to the TV and see this. I was stunned.
Yes.
I was stunned. And with all that we knew at that time in 1978, this could have happened. And so when you think about how even now people don't always know that 75% of those who perished were African Americans. Why? Why is it not a national mourning? That was the first time this had ever happened in this country. Why is it that they have to raise money for a memorial to a group of people who believed in serving their God, who followed a man for different reasons, but lost their lives? 918. So we want to talk about Black Lives Matter. If we really believe all lives matter, how is it that we've gotten to this point and so many people never knew that this was the case? There was suffering, human suffering of all kinds, but the largest toll was on the African Americans in that church congregation.
It seemed almost like they were throwaway people, because when there were so many requests to try to get them to come back, and you see so many excuses that were offered. Well, there's a separation between church and state. Well, we really shouldn't go in because the government shouldn't be messing around with the church. Even when the families kept saying, no, there is something wrong. There's something very wrong. And
there
we
was
need you
evidence
to investigate.
of that. Yeah,
yes.
There was plenty of evidence of what was going on that was wrong at that time. I think it's hard to believe that a man who was once recognized and cherished for his good work is now this beast.
And that's what he was. No, they were in the United States. Am I understanding correctly? It was started in the United States. He started getting investigated, and then he took his people over to Ghana.
Yes, Guyana.
Okay.
Yes, and they did that. He did that to escape the findings from the investigation. So one of the participants made a comment that was very interesting and said and discussed the amount of hours that they put into the agricultural project, the hours that they put into the church service and recruiting and politically helping those who were supporting the church. And this participant said that they worked day and night, would leave the full-time job, come and work again on another project that was related to the church, sleep for several hours, and then get up and do it all over again. And on payday, would bring their check and turn it over to the church. And so the question was, well, did you get something back? And the participant said, yes, I got 50 cents. And someone said, well, that's better than, you know, the next person who didn't get anything back. And this participant said, I never got anything back because that 50 cent went into the Coke machine for me to treat myself to a soda. So in actuality, his blood, sweat, and tears, right? The soda, everything, the check, everything was turned over to the church.
Wow. We see and we know, you know, from everything that we've read, that Jonestown created this nirvana, if you will. And I think everybody wants to find nirvana, even though we know it doesn't exist. He gave the impression that this place is going to solve every problem that you have here. And I do think that some people believed him. They believed we're going to go to paradise because, you know, you're in a rainforest, you have these beautiful tropical plants, and, you know, you had houses. And when you look at some of the pictures, and I'll show some, you show them in the middle of this beautiful, beautiful rainforest. So you would think it was almost like a sales pitch to say, I'm taking you to paradise. And then you get there, and Leslie talked about, you know, there were food shortages.
Yes.
That's not paradise. And,
yes.
you know, the labor, and for
Yes.
the locals to think it was a slave camp.
And never do anything about it.
And never did anything about it.
When you do research and you look at the pictures, there is nothing other than the promo videos that gives you the impression that it is paradise. It clearly looks like a slave camp. It's very clear. Even the ships, it just takes you back. One of the things that I will mention in conducting my research is that there were things I was prepared for and things that I wasn't. I really, if I had to coach anyone who is going to conduct any type of research like this, I have a whole lot to say. You can read all the things. It isn't until you actually have that experience that you begin to realize that it is affecting you as well. I am rooted and grounded in my faith. I had no challenges with that, but the level of compassion and empathy that just is drawn from you when you are having these kinds of discussions is incredible. And what I learned is that there is a restoration that's needed when you're finished these kinds of interviews. I thought I was prepared. You know, you practice, you have everything ready. And according to all the documentation, Dr. Michelle, you know, you have everything in order, you've checked your list, you're good. But really,
something.
Yeah. So when you listen to the stories and you're watching everything, you just cannot be prepared. And I always talk about how in the focus group, what made it different was that the stories, they put together the pieces of their lives that were missing. When they were sharing stories, where something had happened, someone would say what happened at that time because they were there, and they said, "Oh, I never knew that. I always wondered what happened." They heard stories about their missing loved ones who never made it out. They were relieved. 3 minutes into 3 minutes into the interviews was tears. So we're prepared as researchers. It was beyond tissues. It was washcloths. It was hand towels because of the level of emotion that came up among these group members who had not seen each other and been together to even have the discussions for over 30 some years.
Mhm.
And that's what made it very unique.
Now, you know what I found interesting was when you compare the coverage of Jonestown to the coverage of 9/11,
Yes.
there are you can just compare and contrast, but it was so very different.
Yes.
And I guess I want to say when you know better, you do better.
Mhm.
But clearly, you didn't see the graphic photos from 9/11 that you were able to see publicly from the Jonestown. I mean, and we all know from Jonestown that one famous photo, it's an aerial photo,
Yes.
and you see all those bodies.
Mhm.
We know there were just as many bodies in 9/11, but I don't ever remember seeing anything that
Yeah.
graphic from
And it's a good
9/11.
thing.
It was much more respectful coverage. It was much more focus on the victims and not a lot of focus on the perpetrators. But when the Jonestown issue happened, the focus was on Jim Jones. Most of
It
the stories that
was.
you heard was about Jim Jones.
It
He was the
was.
iconic figure. They wanted to trace back to his childhood, know everything
Yes.
he did. And I just thought, wow, you didn't hear anything
Totally
about the people.
forgot about the followers. And my mom says, she says, you were so sad, like you just didn't understand. I was concerned even back then as a teenager in high school. What about the other people? All you heard about was Jim Jones.
Mhm.
Like, where are their families? And what I didn't understand is that there were generations that day. And think about it now. I mean, I used to belong to a mega church. It started out very small and grew to be a mega church. But I went there. My sisters went there. My mom and dad. I mean, everybody. This is what happens.
This is what happened.
Because the Black church is so much in the community to us.
Mhm.
What lessons do you think, and Ann, you can chime in on this too. What lessons do we learn when we start to see even leaders rising up that way? We know that this is prevalent. We know that this happens where we start to see alarms. There should be some kind of alarm going off when you see leaders, because I think there are certain leaders who can create toxic followership just by their leadership style and what they expect. Why don't you think those alarms go off? I think there's that sense of, yeah, I want to be a part of something, but it just strikes me as odd that they follow in spite of knowing that there are bad things that this person has done. Because I remember watching an interview after the Jonestown Massacre, and there were people that were going to the People's Temple, members that were still in the States. And even though they had this horrific evidence in front of them of what had just happened, they were reserving judgment, not really wanting to say that something bad had happened. And so did you find that there were people that were willing to say, it doesn't change what I think or feel about him?
Well, it's kind of like modern day COVID and Delta variant at this point, because there are, statistics are saying that I work for a pulmonologist right now. And at one time, the count had gone down to maybe 35, 45 people a day. Okay, so now they open up everything. and people start dying again. I mean, I had no one around me that I knew of that had died from COVID. But with the new variant that came out, I mean, there are people all around me now that are dying. I mean, friends who don't believe that the COVID is what it is. They don't think they should wear a mask. They don't think that there's anything wrong. You see all these sports events. You see all of the people gathering in places where they shouldn't be. Churches are opening back up, but people are still dying. And I work right next to an emergency room, and the count, I mean, they're bringing people in during the day, and the wheelchairs, by the time I get to work at 8 o'clock, there are wheelchairs, 4 or 5 wheelchairs down where people have come in, and they're, as quick as they're coming in, they're pushing them out the door with oxygen tanks that last a couple of days or what have you. So if you don't have insurance, you have no home, you get an oxygen tank. What happens when it runs out? So people are trying to, I think back in Jim Jones' time, they were looking for something that, and it was so gradual as he was doing what he was doing, which most evil leaders do. I mean, you had some of the ones that you spoke about with Saddam Hussein and Adolf Hitler, you know, and those people. It's such a gradual movement into what they're doing, and you dismiss some of the things that they do or say. We had a minister at church one time, and I don't know what he was saying, but you know, everybody had their head down, and all of a sudden he started saying off the wall things. And when I looked up, the whole church was looking around like, that didn't sound right. That didn't, you know, we were aware that something was not right. So, you know, it's like, I'm not praying with this anymore. And he finally got finished with his and everybody was like, you know, it's kind of, you looking at each other and said, did that really happen? Did he really say that? You know, so I guess I think that's what kind of happened, in my opinion, as to what these people were doing when they followed Jim Jones. You know, it was so gradual, and he was saying, oh, well, go with me. You know, it's going to be all right. And, you know, you don't have to worry. They're telling you, they're spewing off and telling you things that are not true. But in reality, they weren't listening to the voice of God. And he was saying to them, hey, this is not right. This is not right. You
Yeah,
can't.
I agree. I agree. I think as well, look at what happens in sports. Nobody likes a losing team. If you want to pay for cheap tickets, go to a game where the team has been losing forever. You can get in almost free, $3, right? And same thing with people. They associate themselves with someone who has power, or even gives the appearance of having this power and dominance in all that they do. And so that is part of the attraction. That is part of the attraction. Even knowing what happened during the time of People's Temple, what happened, the information that we found out even after Jim Jones and the massacre in 1978 happened, all of the investigation, how the Freedom of Information Act now has released so much information and is housed for anyone to have access to. There's a lot of information learned. And trust me when I say that during the final comments of one of the focus groups that I held, there was one person who said, with tears in their eyes, that they would definitely still be a part of People's Temple today. And if Jim Jones was alive, they would still be a follower.
So they have nothing else in life to hold on to or cling to except disarray and someone that's just giving them any kind of information because they don't know the truth.
But that was their truth.
Mm.
So that becomes the argument. How do you change that? That was their truth.
Mm. Wow.
You know, I don't know what to say about that, because I think you're absolutely right. But you see that in abusive relationships all the time. You see the person is abused, they go right back. The person is hit, they go right back, because that's all they know. And I don't think all of those people were fragile, but it's interesting, and I'll play some of they call it the death tape, and that was one of the things that was released as part of the Freedom Information Act. I mean, he captured this to the very end where he's talking to them, and you can hear them cheering and clapping at the things that he's saying that were so incoherent.
Mm.
I mean,
It was
clearly
incoherent. And think about the state that they're in. When I say concentration camp, that's what it was. When I say that here's a people who were sleep deprived, nutrition deprived, and brainwashing is taking place, those are the kinds of things that leave you in that state. So when we can hear those tapes and look back at that, that's what we hear. But understand the conditions of which those members of People's Temple living in Jonestown were under. And he did not, everyone there wasn't uneducated and just poor. That is not the case.
Mm.
One of the participants made a comment and said, Jim Jones could talk to you and in 3 minutes size you up and know exactly how to zoom in with his charisma and get you hooked. So we have to remember that when you run into a toxic leader, you never see people just run to the toxic leader. They're recruited, they're led, and they become the follower.
Do you think drugs are involved as well?
Absolutely. So what we do know is that Jim Jones himself had a drug dependence. You can hear it in the tapes, the slurred speech in the tapes, in more than one occasion, but especially in the death tape.
Dr. Edmonds, I'm going to give you the last word. I mean, I think this has been so thought-provoking for me. My heart is broken because I remember the coverage. I didn't know that was our people. And I think it just speaks to the suffering and the hopelessness that they felt in this country, that they followed someone that enslaved them and they still thought that was better. And then once they got there, they were trapped and realized we couldn't go back. And just the hopelessness of a country that I think turned their backs on them. That is a story that I think has to resonate in our community so that we understand that can never happen again. If we don't get this right and understand how that happened, this will happen again.
It's probably already happened, and no one like Dr. Edmonds has done the research on it. I mean, there are lots of things that are going on out there. I can honestly say that with my niece and this other person, I mean, there are things that went on with them that have not been researched, and it's still going on, and no one knows that it's happening.
I will say this. I look at several pictures. I can put a picture of something really ugly on the screen and say, hey, what is that? And he would say, a monster. And you would then give me, I can ask for the characteristics of a monster. You would tell me. Liken that to Jim Jones. And then you wonder, why would someone follow a monster? Because he didn't show up as a monster. He showed up as the preacher, the pastor, the church leader, the community leader.
A lot of mass murderers, look at them. They were handsome men. They were charismatic. They did all the right things, but they were killing people. Jeffrey Dahmer was killing them and eating them.
Yes.
You know, it's you got to know the Holy Spirit, and you have to listen to what he says, because
Yes.
he lead you away from the dangers of the world. I mean, there's been so many instances in people's lives where he's led them in a different direction altogether, and you wonder, that's not where I wanted to go. I think you said it at the very beginning, Dr. Michelle, you know, that's not where I wanted to go. That's not what I wanted to do, but he knew better than you did.
The most recent case of a cult, the young man was just convicted, R. Kelly.
Oh. Yes.
Wow.
He came appealing. This was appealing. The song was played in the church. There were churches, and you all know graduations. We have to tell the truth.
Yes. I know everybody was line dancing to him.
I know.
Even when you weren't paying attention to those lyrics, because the lyrics were clearly telling you what he was about, if you really listen to some of his lyrics. But we were just line dancing.
And we'd say, just this one song. I don't care about the rest of the stuff, but this is okay.
Wow. Dr. Edmonds, I want to applaud you, because I do think there needs to be more research into the things that happen to our people, so that we tell our stories the way they need to be told, because I think mainstream media does not tell our stories in a way that educates us and informs us. And I think there needs to be more Black scholars like you out there saying, these are the stories that need to be told, so that this never, ever, ever happens to us again.
Thank you so much. I appreciate being here. Thank you for having me. Thank you for joining us. Ms. Logan, I appreciate all of this. And it is truly an honor to share the time that I spent with the survivors of Jonestown. And I also want to remember to pray for all of those families, every single one of them, because my heart is always with them, will always be with them and their families.
Thank you.
Want your life in my hand, but I'm going to tell you, Christine, without me, life has no meaning. I'm the best friend you'll ever have. And once I have to pay, I'm standing with you, Jara. I'm standing with those people. They're part of me. I can detach myself. My attorney says detach myself. No, 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 no. I never detached myself from any of your troubles. I've always taken your troubles right on my shoulders. And I'm not going to change that now. It's too late. I've been running too long. I'm not going to change now.